Welcome to the Whole Story podcast. This podcast series is focused on inspiring sustainability in agriculture using the framework of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, also known as the SDGs. Each week, our guests are invited to share their story, highlight a particular one of the 17 goals, and leave us with some practical tips for sustainability on farms. I'm Becks Smith, founder of The Whole Story, a B Corp certified social enterprise inspiring, facilitating and articulating holistic sustainability in agriculture. And this podcast has been brought to life in partnership with the incredible team at FMG, who are passionate about partnering with organisations like The Whole Story, so together we can support rural New Zealand. So whatever you're doing while listening to this episode, thanks for choosing us. The best way you can support our mahi is to follow and share the show on whatever app you're listening on, and I hope this episode leaves you inspired and excited about the bigger picture of sustainability in agriculture. Today's guest is Prue Kane, the Jobs for Nature Program Director for WAI Wānaka. This episode is based on the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal number 1, no poverty, and Prue will go deeper into the economic support the Jobs for Nature program provided in a very unstable economic environment faced by Wānaka during the COVID-19 pandemic. So settle in to hear more about the collaborative nature of WAI Wānaka, the incident that Prue's father will never forget, and Prue's take-home tip for sustainability on farm. Okay, so welcome along everybody. Today on the Whole Story podcast, we have the incredible Prue Kane. She is Program Director for Jobs for Nature for WAI Wānaka, and today we're going to be talking about creating jobs and economic support for people and communities across Aotearoa, New Zealand. Welcome, Prue.
Thanks, Becks. Thank you for having me.
So I guess let's kick right into it. Can you tell us the story of Prue Kane? I'm fascinated to hear.
Oh, I'm not sure that it's that fascinating, actually, Becks. Big question to start with. I grew up here, so I'm based in Wānaka, and I grew up on a farm halfway between Wānaka and Taurus, school and university in Dunedin, and then shot overseas as pretty much as quickly as I could for a few years, and then came back for a 3-month holiday about 10 years ago and forgot to leave. So I'm still here on my 10-year/3-month holiday. How I came to WAI, I guess, was I've always been interested in the outside world. I'd been living in Melbourne for 3 years, working for an innovation company over there that match-made intellectual property and technology between small startups and research institutes to multinational companies. When I came home, I got some work experience out at Matukituki Natives, a nursery and landscaping company here in Wānaka, because I thought that I might like to get into native revegetation, which I'm still very passionate about, but it turns out I don't have a particularly green thumb. So I went travelling again after that stint and came back and called my boss there and said, I really enjoyed it, but it turns out that I don't think that particular work is for me. And he agreed, much to my dismay, but then offered me a job helping him set up a Longview Environmental Trust, which we did in more revegetation programs, but from a project management side of things. I left there to run my own business for a while, which was pretty badly affected by COVID. Post the first lockdown, I saw this position with WAI Wānaka advertised for the project manager of their new Jobs for Nature program and applied for that and was very lucky to get it. Yeah, I guess what attracted me to WAI Wānaka was they had a really whole of ecosystem approach to their work that connected the rural, urban and tourism sectors. They did stuff as well. I'm a bit of a doer. I liked the fact that through the Jobs for Nature program, we're able to employ people that went out and did the work. So yeah, still there almost 2 years later.
Well done. That is such an interesting background, and thank you so much for really diving deep into that journey and how you got to where you are today. And I think also really important to reflect there on your ability to look at your strengths and perhaps weaknesses and go that green finger touch maybe wasn't quite for you, but that you could have a really great impact still in the same field, but from a different slant. So yeah, no, that is awesome. Now, you touched on in there about a lot of the work you've done around sustainability. It's such a big word, and it's really It's very trendy at the moment. It's been thrown around a lot. I know to me personally, it goes a lot deeper than that, and that's one of my core values. But I guess, what does sustainability mean to you?
Yeah, it's a funny word, isn't it? And after working for an innovation company when that was a very trendy word, the words sort of become meaningless, don't they? But sustainability to me it's more than just environmental. It needs to be the whole approach. So they're looking at things as an interconnected system. So that includes obviously the natural world, but also the people in the communities that live within that world. As you say, it does go a lot deeper than the term sometimes implies.
Yeah, and that for me was a really big driver to actually starting the whole story, because I just found so often the marketing and in the media, sustainability was being really synonymously linked with environment. And it was just, I felt like people in communities and businesses were being forgotten. And I think that's that really, as you say, the whole of ecosystem approach, where we really have to view it as that interconnected web. That's so powerful. And I think that the more we can view sustainability in that way, the more we can actually drive sustainable changes.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the sustainability of the environment doesn't really exist without the people to sustain it. Yeah, it's an interesting one. And it's just.
Certainly is a big challenge in front of us, but I think that provides a big opportunity as well, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and definitely in agriculture. And I think, nice segue there into agriculture. How would you describe your first link into agriculture?
I was born and raised on a farm. It was right from the start.
Yeah, and I think that's really interesting to touch on, because sometimes people see people in roles around the agricultural sector and they don't recognise that actually there's so many of us working in the agricultural sector, perhaps not at the day-to-day farming level, but with that real roots and farming background. And so I guess we like to put people in the hot seat next, and it's with kindness, but I wonder if you could share with some of our listeners a funny story relating to farming or agriculture.
A lot of my stories are funny now, but pretty horrifying. Pretty horrifying at the time. So I'm not sure that any farmer will probably find this funny. And yeah, growing up in school and uni holidays before we had our driver's license, our farm wasn't remote. It's only 15 minutes drive from Wānaka, but before you get your driver's license, then with no public transport, that's pretty limiting. So school and uni holidays were always working on the farm for Dad. So I was on the grubber one day grubbing the paddock and just went into a bit of a daydream and put the grubber down a little bit early after turning and just ripped out a whole fence. So not funny, but the funny thing was that I really truly did consider whether I just don't go home for lunch and just flee the country rather than have to tell my dad that I'd ripped out his new fence. Yeah, so things like that, I think, bring me joy in hindsight. But yeah, probably lead into why I was not a good fit for working in the nursery as well.
I love how you touch on that. At the time, that was like horrifying, but it's that reflection on it that's really funny. Do you know, like
Dad finds it funny still, but that's okay.
you can't change it now. So
Exactly.
I think it's that kind of awareness of how you're going to laugh about it later that, do you know, I think we all need to bring a little bit into our daily lives of when things go wrong. You think, let's make a really funny story later. It may not be funny now, but if I can store that away and we can get through this in a positive frame of mind, then, hey, that's going to make a really good story to tell later on.
Yeah, sometimes it's the only silver lining, isn't it?
Yeah, building up the repertoire of funny stories.
Yeah.
I know that I've got my bookshelf full of them. So, yeah, I think it's what makes a well-rounded human being, is having the funny stories in the background.
Yeah.
So you've touched on your story to WAI Wānaka and your role as Jobs for Nature program director, but I wonder if you could just explain to our audience a little bit what exactly WAI Wānaka is, and then go into what Jobs for Nature is.
Yeah, absolutely. So WAI Wānaka is a community organisation that started from a group of passionate water advocates, so groups and individuals looking to protect the fresh water of the Upper Clutha. And Mandy Bell, our chair, she'd been away up at the Freshwater Leaders group up in Wellington and came back to Wānaka and looked into what was actually happening here locally and found that there were a lot of groups and different organisations doing projects and with interests in the area, but weren't necessarily talking to each other or communicating. There were duplications and gaps around what was being done. So her and several others got together. A few of those groups combined to form what was the Upper Clutha Lakes Trust, and we renamed ourselves WAI Wānaka back in 2020. Our vision is community wellbeing and ecosystem health for future generations. So we understood that freshwater and the quality of freshwater doesn't exist in isolation, and that the activities carried out on land have a big influence on that, and that it's not just rural and it's not just urban, but it's those sectors coming together and understanding what their impacts are, including the tourism industry, which is huge in Wānaka, understanding what the impacts are and then working together on how to mitigate those. So WAI Wānaka is, we don't do the research, but we're more of a connector, and collaboration is very much at the core of what we do. So understanding, as I say, where those gaps are, and then working together with government agencies, local businesses, the community, to understand, and industry, to understand how we can work together on making things better.
Yeah, it's such a powerful concept, that collaboration and making sure that nothing stands in isolation, we all impact and that we all actually work together for forward progress. And so the Jobs for Nature part of WAI Wānaka, what is the Jobs for Nature program? Where did that come from?
Yeah, so part of the early work that WAI Wānaka did was, with some funding from the Ministry for the Environment and Otago Regional Council, we developed the integrated community catchment plan. So all of the different community groups and stakeholders feeding into what the community wanted for the freshwater in the Upper Clutha, and then backcasting to look at what actions were necessary to get us there. Out of that dropped 60 actions, and a lot of those came under the responsibility of Otago Regional Council or QLDC or DOC, for example. But there were 20 actions that were unaccounted for, that nobody was accountable for. And so WAI Wānaka had its roadmap for the next wee while, working on those 20 actions. That community catchment plan was finalised in March 2020, just before lockdown. And then during lockdown, the Minister of Agriculture called Mandy and said, what have you got going on at the moment? There might be some funding coming out. We're looking at projects across New Zealand to mitigate what was then thought to be a big unemployment crisis. So out of the community catchment plan, Mandy and Julie, one of the other managers at WAI Wānaka, pulled together the application for Jobs for Nature project, which looked at carrying out, and that was through the Ministry for Primary Industry, so carrying out integrated work streams with farmers across the Upper Clutha Basin. So that includes plant weed control, animal pest control, native planting and plant maintenance, and biodiversity and freshwater monitoring as well. So looking at that suite of tasks on farms that landowners don't always get time to do, with so many things going on, like the weed and pest control and planting, but also looking forward to the changes in policy and regulation that were coming, and having the ability to work with landowners on some of those things like carbon planning and the biodiversity and freshwater monitoring as well. So we were successful in that application, which is great, and that's where I started. Quickly after that, we employed 10 full-time equivalents to be working out on the farms every day in those work streams. But what we found in Wānaka was that rather than mass unemployment, there was there was a large amount of underemployment. So a lot of the tourism businesses here in Wānaka are small family-owned operations, and the same with the hospitality, the restaurants and cafes. And they were really keen to keep their staff, but they couldn't do so on a full-time basis with no tourists. So we ended up employing a large number of part-time staff so that they could retain their jobs with their original employers. It worked really well for this community, and it meant that we just had an amazing mix of skills and experience and backgrounds join the team at WAI Wānaka. We had lawyers and designers and hunters and abseiling guides and all sorts that all contributed amazing skills to the team. Yeah, that was how we got up and running with the Jobs for Nature program.
It's just such a powerful story, and I really want to dive a little bit deeper into that. I mean, what do you think it would have meant to the community if Jobs for Nature hadn't been able to provide that balance of employment for this diverse range of skill sets?
Oh, I think at that time, don't know if you've heard, but Wānaka's not a cheap place to live. So I think having something that could supplement the work from other organisations was great at the time. It also meant that these people had the opportunity to work in a sector that they hadn't previously worked in and didn't have necessarily much working knowledge of. During the peak season, so spring and autumn when it's planting season, we have up to 33 people on the field team, 20 people out in the field every day. And not many of those have any experience on farms. So not only was it great for the people we employed, but a really cool opportunity for these people to be introduced into a different industry and actually see what goes on farms and understand the different demands that farmers are having to deal with every day and the different priorities that they're juggling, and a bit of insight into what goes on behind the scenes. In Wānaka, farms are very public. You're either driving past them or you can see them from the lake, or they're very visible to the urban and visitor community, but you don't always understand the background and the context. So I think what's been really cool for me to see is the team having that behind the scenes understanding and getting to know the local farmers and understanding the work that goes on. So that's been very cool.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's also a really interesting bit to unpack there is how, those during that time, which was obviously challenging for a lot of us, but being able to, we know from the research that being outside, being connected with nature, working with a purpose is really important for mental health. And while we watched so much of our country struggling with their mental health during the pandemic, I think giving people an opportunity to have meaningful work outside in nature must have been so powerful to that group of people to know that they were actually out there achieving a purpose.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things, a lot of people, especially that 20 to 30-year-old age bracket, a lot of people moved to Wānaka during lockdown or after lockdown. And so we, recognising the amazing, as I mentioned, skills and experience on the team, we held a workshop at WAI called Retain the Brain Gain. So trying to understand from this cohort how we keep those people in Wānaka and how we keep them engaged in the community and contributing to it. It was a fascinating day, and we got some really great stuff for WAI to work on over the next couple of years in terms of, exactly as you say, really connecting people to a vision and a purpose, and then providing pathways for them to connect into that. We are starting to see that age bracket, now that the borders are open, head overseas and pursue different things. But I think having the ability through the Jobs for Nature and that employment to provide pathways to connect into that work was really cool for the community as well.
Yeah, definitely. So I guess I want to touch on the Sustainable Development Goals for a minute here. And so the reason we're talking today is around goal number 1, which is no poverty. And that goal is to end poverty in all its forms everywhere. I'm just going to dig a little bit deeper here into some of the targets. Each goal has targets underlying it. I think it's really important for our listeners to understand that you've got the infographic of the goals, but underneath each one of those ones, there are a series of targets, which really allows us to connect with the goals at a deeper sense and build a bit of a story and purpose around them. So under goal number 1, there is target 1.5, and I think this is a really key point for the Jobs for Nature work from my reflection anyway, and I'd love to hear your opinion on it. But that target is by 2030 to build the resilience of the poor and those in vulnerable situations and reduce their exposure and vulnerability to climate-related extreme events and other economic, social, and environmental shocks and disasters. And I think the pandemic has really been one of those shocks and disasters where it's led to a population of people being vulnerable. And I think my reflection is that the work that Jobs for Nature has provided for people has allowed a community to build resilience. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that and if you agree.
Yeah, I think absolutely. And I think for the pandemic, it provided employment and security and, as you say, resilience for a cohort of people in that situation. I also think the work we do out on farms hopefully helps the landowners as well improve their resilience to changes that are coming. Pandemic's one example, but climate change is, a hot topic also. And so understanding how through the Carbon 101 workshops that we run and the biodiversity and freshwater monitoring, how those work streams can help landowners not just prepare for changes, but also prepare to take advantage of opportunities that come out of all of those changes. So I think that, you're absolutely right, that 1.5 building resilience is the one that really aligns with the work we do. Also, I think the connections between the rural, urban and visitor sectors is a really important one as well. Just that understanding, I spoke about understanding our impacts, but also the understanding between the sectors so that the community itself is stronger and more understanding of what people are doing, townspeople understanding what the farmers are doing and what they're working on and vice versa. So I think that engagement and communication throughout the community also builds that resilience.
Definitely, that resilience is built when we all feel that sense of community and that, working in a common direction. Yeah, I'd love to just hear a little bit more personally to you, which one of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals really aligns with you?
And I'm going to say thank you, Becks, for giving me a heads up that you were going to ask this question so I could look at the SDGs. As I was saying before we started, I am still familiarising myself with these, and we've done some work at WAI Wānaka on what, as an organisation, what goals we align to, and have prioritised several that we're tracking our progress against, which is really cool. And one of them is partnerships for the goals. And I think for me, that one really, that's probably the key one too. I think a lot of the issues we're facing they're complex and they're going to require some really integrated thinking and pulling on knowledge from different sectors and from different parts of the world to work towards those solutions. So I think the partnerships for the goals is probably the one that I would pick there. They're all pretty tempting, I'm not going to lie. But that's the one I think that for me, collaborating and working together to find those solutions is becoming more and more important.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. It's amazing the number of people I speak to, and that is their number one goal, is that partnerships and collaboration, which is it's so powerful because we are all in this together, and together we can achieve great things. It's hard to go it alone, but once you build a team and you have good diversity of thought and it lifts the energy when you're in a team doing it together and you have different perspectives, then you can really achieve some magical outcomes.
In a time of rapid change, which I think we're in, especially in the agricultural industry now, working together does provide that support structure as well, and just those different ways of thinking, as you say, the diversity of thought to add in there.
Yeah, Now, you spoke there about the rapid change that we're facing at the moment in the agricultural sector. What do you see as the biggest challenge in New Zealand's agricultural sector at the moment regarding sustainability? And then I'd love to hear how you would flip that and turn that into an opportunity.
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge at the moment is just the sheer volume and rate of change across every sort of facet of a farm business at the moment. And a lot of big changes where nothing is certainty. There's a lot of uncertainty as well on what's expected and what needs to be done. But as you say, with all of those challenges, there will be opportunities. So I think it's just a matter of understanding how we position ourselves as an industry and position ourselves to take advantage of those opportunities. Check off the challenges one by one as they can be, and then so that we can be open to new ideas and new ways of thinking that might lead to those opportunities that are surely bound to come.
Yeah, that's a really great answer. And I'd love to ask you a little bit deeper around that. I've just been thinking in the background. Do you think it's more important for individual landowners to gain true certainty around all of these issues, challenges, and changes? Or do you think it's really around building trust and collaboration with a community group such as WAI Wānaka or a local catchment group or an industry body to be able to help you with the answers and the path forward? Yeah.
It's an easy thing to say, a harder thing to do, to be open to change and comfortable with change. But I think it's becoming more and more necessary. And you're absolutely right, Bex. I think just there will be uncertainty across some of those areas for a while yet. So understanding how you can connect in to groups and industry bodies that can help with that, and just understanding as well what's important to your business and your farm vision, I guess, and working on the most important things to you first. Not always possible when there are regulations that need to be met, but yeah, and as you say, working together and being open to what opportunities might come out of this.
So, speaking of opportunities coming out of this, what's next on the cards for Prue Kane? What do the next 12 months look like for you?
We at WAI, we just work-wise, we've just signed off on a contract to be one of 3 pilots in the Our Land and Water National Science Challenge project called Revitalising Te Taio. We think it's a really exciting project, weaving the different knowledges together, so Mātauranga Māori with local landowner knowledge and Western science, to understand what land use and land management practices might lead to enhancing the vitality of Te Taio, but also leading to opportunities in the value chain and market. So we're working closely with the National Parent Project to define what that looks like here in Wānaka, and working with the local farming community and broader community as well to move that forward. So that's a 2-year project that we're just kicking off now. That will be exciting. And then also looking at, for our Jobs for Nature work, looking at how we transition out of the 3-year funding that we received to make that work sustainable in the long term, and make sure, I think, importantly, making sure we're looking after our staff and providing the pathways for our staff, but then also making sure that the work we've carried out over the last couple of years is maintained, as weed and pest control definitely requires ongoing attention. So making sure we have the capacity to be able to do that. And then I think I'm looking forward to hopefully leaving COVID in the past and the world opening up and travel opportunities and things like that too. So yeah, I think the next 12 months is pretty exciting.
Pretty busy by the sounds of things too. All sounds like good work though. And nice to have some personal goals in there as well around travel. I certainly know I've missed getting out of the country and seeing a bit of the world. So it's exciting to have that possibility back on the horizon. So one last thing, I love to leave our listeners back down at the grassroots level. So what I'd like to hear from you is, what is one practical take-home action that farming businesses can take to contribute to sustainability?
I always feel it's very easy to say these things sitting in my nice warm office. rather than being out on the farm. But I think at the moment, for me, knowing your greenhouse gas number, probably, there are lots of tools and support out there to understanding, calculating your carbon number or greenhouse gas number. And even though, there's still work to be done through the pricing mechanism, and it may not seem like there's a lot of options in terms of mitigation, I think just going through the process of calculating your emissions and understanding what the source of those emissions are gets that thinking going on in terms of where those might be able to be reduced, or possible sources of sequestration, or potential areas that might be planted to add to that. So that's probably might be informed by the fact that we're working on those carbon workshops and things at the moment at WAI, but that's where I'm thinking people can add to their understanding at the moment.
Yeah, definitely. That is such a powerful take-home tip. And I'll make sure that we have some links in the show notes to places people can go to help them calculate their GHG or their carbon numbers. Or they can reach out to The Whole Story and we can put people in place to actually help you get that calculation done. Never fear, you're not alone out there trying to get these calculations done. There's plenty of support in place, and we will make sure that those resources are listed. I want to thank you so much for your time today, Prue, and I really want to commend you on the work that Jobs for Nature is doing to not only help a cohort of people build resilience during these times of struggle, but also to recognise that farmers have a lot on their plate, and that actually outsourcing some of these jobs to people is actually lifting that burden. And I think that's really helping from a physical day-to-day getting jobs done point of view, but also from a mental health and resilience point of view with that burden and overwhelm. So I really want to commend you on that work and congratulate yourself and the team at WAI Wānaka for that hard mahi, because you're really making a difference. But also just thank you so much for your generosity with your time today, and I'm sure people will gain a lot out of listening to this episode.
Thanks, Becks. Thanks for having me along.
No, it's been my absolute pleasure, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
Yes, you too. Thanks, Becks.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Whole Story podcast. We really hope you enjoyed it and are feeling inspired and optimistic about putting sustainability into practice on farm. I have one last request for you before you go. Make sure, whatever platform you're listening to us on, that you hit follow and share the show or episodes with your friends, so that together we can grow our community and inspire sustainability in agriculture in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And thanks again to FMG for partnering with The Whole Story so that we could bring this podcast to life for you all to enjoy. Catch you next time.